This is the story of a town that got killed in a single morning, resurrected by one of the richest men in America, and is now being sold off again, less than a year after his death. July 30th, 2003. That's the day Pillowtex Corporation filed for bankruptcy in a Delaware courtroom. By the end of that day, 4,340 people in Kannapolis, North Carolina, had no job, making it the largest single-day mass layoff in North Carolina's history. Nationwide, the number climbed past 7,000. Not the largest over a year, not the largest across a slow decline, the largest ever in one announcement, on one Wednesday. To understand how a company could erase a town's entire economic base overnight, you have to understand what Kannapolis actually was. This wasn't just a factory town, it was a mill town in the truest, oldest sense. One company, one product, one century. Cannon Mills was founded here in 1887, and by the middle of the 20th century it had become the largest home textile manufacturer on earth. Sheets, towels, pillowcases. If you owned bedding in America, there was a real chance it came from Kannapolis. The company built the houses, it built the churches, and for generations, Cannon Mills wasn't just where you worked in Kannapolis, it was Kannapolis. That single industry dependency is exactly what made the collapse total. In 1997, the Dallas-based Pillowtex Corporation bought Fieldcrest Cannon for $700 million, inheriting a business already straining under debt. The same NAFTA-driven offshoring that had already gutted hundreds of mills across the Carolinas finally came for Kannapolis. Pillowtex filed for bankruptcy once in November of 2000, clawed its way out by May of 2002, and then spent a little over a year sliding toward a second, final collapse. When it came, there was no restructuring plan. The company didn't intend to survive this one. It intended to liquidate. And here's where the story gets its sharpest edge, the part almost nobody mentions. 9 months before that bankruptcy filing, Pillowtex's CEO wasn't some anonymous executive who went down with the ship. His name was David Perdue. He'd taken the job in mid-2002, inherited a company already carrying a heavy debt load and an underfunded pension, and by his own later account, couldn't find a buyer or new financing. In March of 2003, 4 months before the company folded, Perdue walked away. He left with a compensation package reported at roughly $1.7 to $2 million, what's commonly called a golden parachute, an exit payout insulated from the collapse it preceded. An internal auditor at the time said his long absences from the North Carolina headquarters were terrible for morale, that employees felt he'd already given up. 4 months after Perdue left, the doors closed for good. What happened to him next is the detail that should genuinely change how you think about this story. Perdue didn't disappear into disgrace. He became CEO of Dollar General that same year, trading a collapsed textile empire for the company that would come to define American discount retail. From there, he ran for the United States Senate in Georgia in 2014 and won, serving until 2021. And as of 2025, David Perdue holds the office of United States Ambassador to China. The man whose exit preceded Kannapolis' darkest day is now one of the most senior diplomats representing the United States government. That's not a footnote. That's the ghost that still sits at the edges of the story, the executive who left and kept rising while the town he left behind hit zero. Because for the roughly 4,300 people left holding nothing, there was no such protection. Under the Federal WARN Act, mass layoffs of this size require 60 days advance notice. Pillowtex gave none. Within a month of the bankruptcy, Cabarrus County's unemployment rate jumped from 5.3% to 10.9%. Health insurance ended immediately. Workers who'd spent 30 and 40 years hemming sheets were told their final weeks of pay weren't coming. The company's pension obligations, already underfunded before the collapse, left retirees facing reduced benefits despite federal RSA protections that were never designed for a liquidation this complete. This is the part of every Milltown collapse story that's easy to summarize and impossible to actually sit with, an entire local economy, built patiently over more than a century, dismantled in the time it takes to read a press release. What had happened to steel towns in the Rust Belt a generation earlier now came to the textile South. And like those Rust Belt collapses, what was left behind was physical too, and that's where the second half of the story begins. Plant 1, the flagship Cannon Mills complex in the heart of Kannapolis, was enormous, roughly the size of the Pentagon. A building that size doesn't get quietly repurposed. It either gets torn down or it sits as a monument to what the town used to be. For a while, it did both, standing empty while officials debated what an already depressed region could possibly do with 6 million square feet of dead textile infrastructure. The answer came from an unlikely direction. In December of 2004, a real estate firm called Castle & Cook won a 264-acre land auction for the mill site, with a bid of $6.4 million. A fraction of what the operation had once been worth. Castle & Cook was owned by David H. Murdock, the billionaire chairman of Dole Food Company, and in a detail that adds a strange symmetry to this whole story, Murdock had actually owned this same mill decades earlier, back when it was still called Cannon Mills, before selling it in the 1980s. He was buying back the ruins of something he used to own. Demolition began in mid-2005, and what Murdock proposed to build in its place was, by any measure, audacious. A $1.5 billion, million-square-foot biotechnology and nutrition research campus, built in partnership with the state of North Carolina and the UNC University system. Not warehouses, not another factory, a hub for genomics and nutrition science in a town that had just lost its only industry. For years, it looked like it might not work. Kannapolis' own mayor would later describe the empty mill site before construction as a white elephant sitting in the middle of the town, the kind of phrase that only makes sense once you understand just how uncertain this bet really was. The 2008 financial crisis hit right as the first buildings opened, gutting state funding for the university partners and slowing recruitment for years. Researchers who did come reported a recurring problem. The science was legitimate, but Kannapolis itself still felt, in the words of one campus official, like a ghost town, hard to sell to scientists used to major cities. But Murdock kept funding it. Over roughly 2 decades, his organization poured more than $500 million of his own money into the campus and the surrounding downtown. A new city hall, a library, a YMCA, eventually a minor league ballpark. Slowly, unevenly, something did take root. 8 universities eventually established a presence on what's now called the North Carolina Research Campus. Rowan Cabarrus Community College built a biotechnology training center on land Murdock donated. What had been the site of America's largest single-day mass layoff became, gradually, a genuine, if still incomplete, life sciences hub. And then, in June of 2025, David Murdock died at his ranch in California. He was 102 years old. This is the fact that reframes everything about how this story ends, because it isn't finished. Murdock wasn't a distant investor who wrote checks and walked away. By every account, he was the single, decentralized authority holding this entire resurrection together. As he aged and visited less, town officials had already been warning for years that the campus lacked centralized leadership. When he died, that vacuum became permanent. And the timing of what happened next is almost too clean for a documentary to invent, which is exactly why we're not inventing it. In 2026, Castle & Cook announced it was exiting Kannapolis entirely, selling its remaining North Carolina real estate holdings, including land in and around the research campus, to a Charlotte-based firm called Insight Properties, as part of a new $500 million redevelopment plan. City officials confirmed the operational research already underway at the campus would continue uninterrupted through the ownership transition. But the man who built the resurrection is gone, and barely a year later, the ground beneath it is changing hands again. So here's the honest, unresolved question this story actually leaves you with. Kannapolis was killed once, in a single day, by a bankruptcy filing. It was resurrected once, over 2 decades, by one billionaire's obsession with turning a ruined mill into a science campus. And now, with that billionaire dead and his company selling off the land, the town is being handed to new owners for a second time. This time, not through a court auction, but through an orderly $500 million real estate deal. Is that a resurrection continuing under new stewardship? Or is it a second colonization? A town that spent 23 years being owned, first by a textile company, then by one man's singular vision, and now by whichever developer holds the paperwork next. Kannapolis never got to answer that question for itself in 2003. It's not entirely clear it's being asked to answer it now, either.